At my college reunion, an old flame pulled me aside, smirking. "I still have those love letters you wrote," he whispered. "And I wonder what your family would think if they saw them." My stomach dropped as he scrolled through his phone, showing me screenshots of messages from a decade ago. "Meet me tonight," he said, "or they get sent." My hands trembled until I realized something he didn't know. Smiling, I took his phone, opened the photos, and pressed send myself. His face went pale as he read the message I had just forwarded. To his wife. "Last month, I went to my 10-year college reunion in Chicago. I almost didn't go. My husband, Paul, had to convince me. He thought it would be fun. See some old friends," he said. Reminisce. It wasn't fun. The night started fine. The usual, polite nods, small talk, drinks. I was catching up with an old roommate when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned and saw Nick. My stomach dropped. Nick was my first real love in college. The kind of love that makes you lose your mind. The kind that turns you into a fool. He was charming in that effortless, cocky way that made people let their guard down. And I did. Hard. I wrote him love letters, pages and pages, pouring my heart out like an idiot. I believed everything he said. That he loved me too. That he saw a future with me. Then, one day, he disappeared. Stopped answering texts. Ignored my calls. I finally saw him a week later, on the quad, laughing with his friends like I had never existed. I asked him what happened. He just smiled and shrugged. Said, "That was fun, wasn't it?" That was Nick. And now, 10 years later, he was standing in front of me, smirking like nothing had changed. "I still have those love letters you wrote," he said, leaning in like we were sharing a secret. His breath smelled like whiskey. "And I wonder what your family would think if they saw them." I felt my face go hot. Before I could react, he pulled out his phone and turned the screen toward me. My heart nearly stopped. Screenshots. Pages of them. Messages. Old texts. The letters I had written, typed out in perfect clarity. I could barely breathe. Nick slid his phone back into his pocket. "Meet me tonight," he said, voice low. "Or they get sent." Then he walked away, leaving me standing there, wine glass shaking in my hand. I felt sick. This wasn't some random old messages. This was years of my words, collected, saved. Why would he keep them? I tried to calm myself down. Maybe he was bluffing. Maybe this was just another one of his mind games. But what if he wasn't? I thought of my husband. My kids. Then I thought of Nick. And I realized something. Nick still thought I was the same girl from college. The one who cried when he ignored her texts. The one who begged for answers. He had no idea who he was dealing with now. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to panic. I was going to end this. I set down my wine glass and walked out of the ballroom. Nick was outside, leaning against a pillar, checking his phone. He barely looked up when I approached. "I knew you'd come," he said, grinning. I snatched his phone out of his hand. His smile vanished. "Give it back." I ignored him. My fingers flew over the screen, scrolling through the messages, my own words flashing by. Then I saw something that made my breath catch. His texts. To his wife. To other women. And then, a message to me. 2 weeks ago. A message I had ignored. He had been planning this. He had been waiting. Nick reached for the phone, but I stepped back. "Don't," he warned. I smiled. Then, without breaking eye contact, I tapped the screen. Send. His phone vibrated in my hand. Nick's face drained of color. "What the hell did you just do?" I tossed the phone back to him. "You wanted me to see the messages," I said. "I figured your wife should see some of them too." His fingers gripped the phone so hard his knuckles went white. He was frozen, staring at the screen. A second later, his phone buzzed again. And again. His wife was reading everything. Nick looked up at me, jaw clenched. "You don't know what you just did." I took a step closer. "No, Nick. You didn't know what you were doing." Then I turned and walked away. Inside, the reunion carried on like nothing had happened. People laughing, drinking, catching up. I found Paul across the room and went straight to him. He kissed my temple. "Everything okay?" I smiled. "Yeah, everything's perfect." Then, from behind me, I heard a phone ring. And I knew it wasn't over. Nick didn't leave right away. I could feel his eyes on me from across the room. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I already knew what was happening. His phone was vibrating in his pocket. His wife was reading every disgusting message. His carefully built life was falling apart in real time. Good. I picked up a fresh glass of wine and took a slow sip. Act normal. Act like nothing had just happened. Paul kept talking to a friend, his hand resting on my back, completely unaware of the storm brewing behind us. I should have felt safe. I should have felt like it was over. But then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You're going to regret this." My stomach twisted. I turned my head slightly. Nick was gone. I scanned the room, but I didn't see him. Just people laughing, drinking, lost in nostalgia. Everything looked normal, but my skin prickled. The air felt wrong. I wasn't scared. Not exactly. But I wasn't stupid either. Nick wasn't the type to go down quietly. I slipped my phone into my clutch and leaned into Paul. Let's go soon. He smiled. Tired already? I nodded. Yeah, just a long day. He kissed the top of my head. All right, we'll say a few more goodbyes and head out. I smiled back, but my mind was racing. Paul had no idea what had just happened. I didn't want to tell him. Not yet. He'd be furious, and honestly, I didn't know what Nick was capable of when he was angry. I needed to get out of here before I found out. But then, another text. A photo. I opened it. It was my house. Taken tonight. The porch light was on. The curtains in the living room were drawn just like I had left them. Someone was outside my house. Watching. My fingers tightened around my phone. Nick was still in this building. He couldn't have taken that photo. Which meant someone else had. I didn't think. I just moved. I grabbed Paul's arm. We need to leave. Now. He frowned. What? What's wrong? I'll explain in the car. Paul didn't argue. He knew that tone in my voice. It was the same tone I used when one of our kids got hurt. When something was seriously wrong. We said our quick goodbyes and left. As we walked to the parking lot, I scanned every shadow. Every car. Every person still lingering outside the venue. Nick was nowhere. But that didn't mean I was safe. Paul unlocked the car, and I got in fast, locking the doors as soon as we were inside. I showed him the messages. His face darkened as he scrolled. Is this some kind of sick joke? It's Nick. Paul's hands tightened on the wheel. And the picture? I swallowed. I don't know. Paul didn't say another word. He pulled out of the parking lot fast. We drove in tense silence. The streetlights flashed past, cold and bright. I kept checking the rearview mirror, my hands shaking in my lap. Every car behind us felt suspicious. Then, as we turned onto our street, I saw it. A black car. Parked 2 houses down. Headlights off. Engine running. Paul saw it too. Stay in the car. No, stay. In. The car. He pulled into the driveway and got out. The black car didn't move. Paul walked right up to it and knocked on the driver's window. Hard. Nothing. Then, the car sped off. Paul stood there, fists clenched, watching it disappear down the street. I stepped out of the car, my heart pounding. Paul turned to me. Go inside. Lock the doors. I did. The second I stepped inside, I checked the locks, closed the curtains, and turned on every light in the house. My hands were shaking. Paul came in a minute later, his face unreadable. Nick? I whispered. I don't know, he said. But someone was waiting for us. Then, his phone buzzed. A message. From Nick. You shouldn't have done that. I stared at the screen. Paul's jaw tightened. Call the cops. I took a deep breath. No, not yet. Because I had the sudden, sinking feeling that this wasn't over. Not even close. Paul wanted to call the cops. I could see it in his face. He was already thinking about how this would play out, filing a report, getting the police involved, maybe even changing the locks. But something told me that wouldn't stop Nick. I shook my head. Not yet. Paul exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Then what? We just wait around until the psycho decides to do something worse. I didn't have an answer. We stood there in the living room, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I kept staring at the front door like it might burst open at any second. Then my phone rang. Unknown caller. I felt ice crawl up my spine. Paul grabbed the phone from my hand before I could answer. He put it on speaker. Who is this? Silence. Then a low chuckle. Nick. You really shouldn't have done that, he said. Paul's face went red. Listen, you piece of... Nick cut him off. How's the house? Cozy? My stomach twisted. Paul's grip on my phone tightened. You come near my family, and I swear to God, relax, Nick said lazily. I'm not there. Paul and I exchanged a look. That black car. The photo. Nick wasn't there. But someone else was. I have to say, Nick continued, I'm impressed. You always were smarter than you looked. Back in college, I thought I could keep stringing you along forever. Guess I underestimated you. I forced myself to speak. What do you want, Nick? Nick sighed dramatically. See, that's the problem. I don't want anything now. I did. But you ruined that, didn't you? Neither of us spoke. I could have been nice about this, he went on. Could have let you talk your way out of it. Maybe even let you keep playing house with your husband. But no. You had to make things difficult. Paul took a step closer to me. Protective. Nick's voice dropped lower. Now I have to return the favor. The call disconnected. For a second, neither of us moved. Then Paul grabbed his keys. We're going to a hotel. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. We packed fast. Just enough for a night or two. As Paul loaded the bags into the car, I checked the locks one last time. Then I froze. One of the windows was unlocked. I was sure I had locked it earlier. I was sure. But now, the latch was just slightly off. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering. Someone had been inside. Paul saw my face the second I stepped outside. What? I just shook my head. Drive. Now. He didn't ask questions. We left. As we pulled out, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The black car was back. But this time, it wasn't parked. It was following us. Paul saw it too. His hands clenched the wheel. Hold on. He hit the gas. The car behind us did the same. My breath came fast. Nick wouldn't do this himself. Paul nodded, eyes locked on the road. Which means he's got help. The black car stayed close, keeping pace with us. Paul took a sharp turn onto a side street. Then another. Then another. The car followed. I fumbled for my phone. I'm calling the police. But before I could dial, the black car suddenly slammed on the brakes. We kept going. I twisted around in my seat, trying to see who was inside, but the windows were too dark. Then, just like that, the car turned around and drove off. Paul didn't slow down. We're not going home. I swallowed hard. Where do we go? He didn't answer. Because now, neither of us knew who we were really dealing with. And Nick wasn't the only problem anymore. Paul didn't stop driving until we were nearly an hour out of the city. The black car hadn't followed us. Not that we could see. But neither of us were willing to take any chances. We ended up at a roadside motel, the kind with flickering neon signs and doors that opened straight to the parking lot. Paul parked in the farthest corner, away from the street. He checked us in under a fake name, paid in cash. Inside the room, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone. Nick hadn't called again. No more texts. Silence. Which made it worse. Paul paced near the window, pulling the curtain back every few minutes. His jaw was tight. We need to do something. I nodded, but my mind was racing. Nick wasn't just messing with me anymore. This was bigger. He had people watching our house. Following us. Why? There was something I was missing. Then it hit me. I opened my phone and scrolled through the messages I had sent to Nick's wife. I had only sent screenshots of his texts to other women. But Nick had years' worth of messages. What else did he have? A sinking feeling formed in my stomach. Paul. My voice was tight. What if Nick has something on me? Paul turned. What do you mean? I mean, what if this isn't just about the love letters? Nick had been saving things for years. Why? Paul sat next to me, exhaling hard. Do you have any idea what else he might have? I shook my head. No, but I need to find out. Paul nodded. Then we forced his hand. The next morning, we drove back to the city. I wasn't scared anymore. I was angry. I called Nick. He answered on the first ring. Miss me already? Meet me. Silence. Then a laugh. You really think I'm that stupid? I think you're a coward, I shot back. You want to control the narrative, right? So let's talk. Face to face. Nick hesitated. Then, fine. Noon. That coffee shop on West Monroe. Come alone. Paul shook his head before I even hung up. No way in hell. He's not gonna show if you're there. Paul clenched his jaw. Then I'll be outside. I didn't argue. We drove straight to the coffee shop. Paul parked a block away but kept the car running. I walked in. Nick was already there, sitting at a table in the back, grinning like he had already won. I sat down. What do you want? Nick leaned back. See, I thought about leaking those messages. I really did. But then I remembered something. He tapped his phone. I braced myself. Then he turned the screen toward me. I felt my stomach drop. A video. And I was in it. It was old, years old, but I knew exactly what I was looking at. I was at a party. Drunk. Stupid. Saying things I shouldn't have. And Nick had recorded it. Every word. My hands clenched into fists. You've been holding on to this for 10 years? Nick smirked. Insurance. My pulse pounded in my ears. If he leaked it, it wouldn't just embarrass me. It would ruin me. And he knew it. I exhaled slowly. So that's what this is really about. Nick tilted his head. I gave you a chance to keep this between us. You didn't take it. I forced myself to stay calm. And what do you want now? Nick smiled. A favor. I laughed, bitter and sharp. You want a favor? He leaned in. I need money. Of course. I know you're doing well, he continued. Happy little family, nice house. I just need a little something to make all this go away. I stared at him. Nick had always been a leech. A liar. But this? This was pathetic. I stood up. Nick frowned. Where are you going? I pulled my phone out and tapped the screen. Nick's face went pale. What are you doing? I turned the phone toward him. I was recording. His own voice played back at us. I just need a little something to make all this go away. Nick lunged for my phone, but I was faster. I stepped back, raising my voice. Blackmail's a crime, Nick. People in the coffee shop turned to look. Nick froze. I lowered my voice, just for him. If I send this to the cops, what do you think happens to you? His hands clenched. You wouldn't. I smiled. Try me. His jaw twitched. He was cornered, and he knew it. I let that sink in. Then I said, delete everything. Right now. Nick hesitated. I stared him down. Do it or I press send. After a long pause, he caved. He pulled out his phone and started deleting. Every message. Every file. Every video. When he finished, he looked up at me, furious. Happy now? I kept my voice calm. If I ever hear from you again, if you ever come near my family, if I even think you're trying something, I will destroy you. Nick held my gaze. Then, finally, he looked away. I left without another word. Paul was already outside, waiting. Well? I climbed into the car, exhaling hard. It's over. Paul drove us home. For a while, I kept waiting for something to happen. A message. A call. A sign that Nick wasn't finished. But nothing came. A week passed. Then 2. And just like that, he was gone. Paul and I didn't talk about it much. But one night, as we sat on the couch, he said, "You scared me." I looked at him. "I've never seen you like that before," he admitted. "So ruthless." I didn't know what to say. Because he was right. The girl Nick thought he could blackmail was gone. The girl who begged for answers, who cried when he left, who let him win, she didn't exist anymore. And for the first time, I wasn't sad about it. I met Paul's gaze. I did what I had to. He nodded. I know. And that was the end of it. Nick was just a name from my past now. A lesson I had finally learned. And I would never be that girl again.